What's happening, guys? Welcome to another Sunday night scan. This week we're going to go over about a dozen names or so, recap a little bit of last week, and just kind of see where we're headed. So first and foremost, I always kind of like to talk about something that happened last week, something that I could improve on, etc. So Domo and NTGN were pretty good trades for me on Friday. However, LCI, although I knew it, stole my attention. I put the blinders on, and not that I was fighting the trade, not that I was scaling into a loser, but I just knew that it wasn't a short. I knew that I didn't need to add anything into there until it started to break down. I even warned against doing so, and so I didn't scale in. However, I just stayed in to my starter, and I coulda, woulda, shoulda. Had a much more relaxed type of Friday, and I probably could have gotten along that ENDP trade that I was interested in, but instead I was kind of focused on finding the top on LCI. So again, not fighting it, but just watching it, waiting for that top to come in, whereas, well, just take ENDP for the trade that I thought that was going to go to 350 and watch the whole thing happen, but unfortunately it wasn't part of it. So that's going to happen. So my goal moving forward this week, my goal, coming out of the gate tomorrow, is treat everything off the open as a scalp for the most part, and don't put on the blinders thinking that it's going to be a full day type of trade. The full day type of trade kind of thought process happens after the 9:45, 10 a.m. So let the morning emotion kind of come out. Let it start to either find a top and fade off, or look for it to start to base and then curl off with a risk based off of VWAP. So anyway, with that said, that's going to be my goals out of the gate tomorrow. And most importantly, if the trade is not working, boot it out. Get rid of it. There's no reason to exhaust yourself on any trades in this market because there's so many things that are working. And Domo, for example, on Friday, I was right side the entire day, had a great entry, worked out really, really well, but I put a lot more of attention and size to it, whereas CRWD and ZM and a few other trades had those $3, $4, $5, $6 unwinds, whereas this is what I was hoping for. I was hoping we get into the 15, the 14, something like that, but it literally took all day. And then the trade finally did come in. So the idea was right. It was just a very exhausting trade. So again, I want to limit the exhaustion kind of aspect of things this week and just really focus on names that are trending away from VWAP. Stop trying to capture a big trade on every name and just really zone in on those A+ setups that just like I talked about with FSLY. Stop trying to have in out, and really focus on the big picture, A+. Let it do the work versus you doing the work. So anyway, so Domo was a good failed follow through type momentum name. It was an earnings play, complete unwind, and finally came into the lower days into the close, the 1580s, and provided a pretty nice trade. So that was one trade. NTGN, any of the guys that had followed the MRNS idea or the example that I was talking about last week with failed follow through momentum. This was a carbon copy of that trade. So basically what I do is I look for the momentum. I'm not trying to be a hero finding the top. Let it come in, let it do its thing, let it start to dabble back towards the highs and fail. Let it fail again. And so if you actually take a step back and look at this trade, you'll see lower high, lower high, lower high, lower high, lower high, and it's easy after the fact. You can see it, but that's what I'm looking at in real time. And for me, that's worth the risk towards the highs on partial size. So unfortunately, I didn't scale into this trade very large just because it worked out perfectly. It worked out so perfect that there wasn't really a chance to add. Yeah, I could have added here, but I didn't want to get into a situation where it flushed out and it ramped right back up. So I wanted to let it kind of do its thing for a little bit, ideally rally back, trap some longs, the bounce buyers, and then come back in. So instead, we came in, stayed heavy, came in. So I've got there about a little bit more than a quarter size. And I never scaled into the trade, unfortunately, to any large amount, which I was pretty confident on that trade. But the good news is, after hours, it looks like it's coming back a little bit. So hopefully that has a little bit of follow-through momentum. Hopefully some shorts that might have maybe overstayed, something like that, and we get a little bump up, back up towards this maybe 350, 370 range, and have another opportunity. Other than that, ENDP, goal, can't nail them all. It's easy to call a stock, but it's not always easy to trade a stock, right? When you actually have skin in the game, it's never as easy to hold the name. Even if you have a perfect entry, it's just, how many times have you held something and then it fails to follow through, and you look at it and you say, oh, I should have sold. Well, you also can't do that same thing here where all you had to do was hold. Yeah, it's hard to do that. It's hard to do that. So, with that said, my goal on this one was not to chase it, but again, if you were to chase it, say I wanted 10,000 shares long as just a kind of a starting point, I'd be looking for a 280, where it's kind of going up. I started to realize that it's going to have some pretty decent follow-through momentum. I might just want to put on 2,000 shares. If my goal is to have 10,000 shares, I might want to put on 2 just in case it goes 280s, 290s, 3s, and it never comes back. That way, no matter what, I have a little bit of skin in the game. And then if it does go to 3, now I have that 275 or 280 average, whatever it was, that I can add into. And I actually have a little bit of a padding. So now I can add at 3, and I've got maybe a 285, 290 average. I can add at 320. Now I've got a 305 average, things like that. So the goal here was to basically buy dips with a risk based off of 270s. Well, it worked perfect, and it worked so perfect that it kind of made me think, maybe it's going to tease us a little bit. Maybe let me just take a step back and rather than take it now, I'll try to get it back. Get in there lower later on. So anyway, where I second guessed myself was the exact bottom. And, I missed the trade for the most part. So I did get in there a little bit, and I traded it into the close. But, again, it wasn't worth any shouting about. So I do think we're going to have a big trade here this week. I think that we can still have some type of big momentum, especially if it pulls back. If it pulls back 320, 330s, and it starts to consolidate and rally, especially if it sets up for a red to green trade, I'm interested in that. So I'm going to definitely be looking for that, and we'll see what happens. But then, just to kind of reiterate what I was saying on LCI, every single dip on this was a trap. And, what I was talking about in the room, everybody gets excited. They see this, big stuff move and then slams down. But what I kept on saying is, again, look left, draw the line across, right? So you can see the 1250s was the base for a while. You can see over here that 1330s was a base. And then again, back over here, I think it was about 1280s or so. So you had these key levels come in, 1250, 1280, 1330s. And if you just draw a line across, you'll be able to start to see, all right, this is the area that needs to crack. And it's not just cracking. It's not just it comes under that line of support. What I need to see is it come back and retest and fail, retest and fail, retest and fail. And ideally, you got to stuff a little bit lower, stuff a little bit lower, stuff a little bit lower. And at that point, it starts to get heavier and heavier, and then unwinds. But again, going back, always understanding that unless it breaks that prior area of resistance the prior area of support from this morning, you're still in an uptrend, and you have to understand that. And that was exactly what happened here. And I was also a little excited here as a potential unwind, and unfortunately I wasn't covering there. I was in the 1250s, thinking that if it flushed out to 51, 52, 53, then my wish orders could get filled, and it might snap back up to 13, and long story short, it only came down to 1270s and snapped right back up. So I ended up bailing into the 13s, and it probably was a little bit of an exhausting trade, avoidable for sure, and it pulled my attention away from ENDP. So that was my Friday in a nutshell. But overall, good. Domo was great. NTGN was even better. But again, my goal for this week ahead is to not have these LCI situations where I just get, in that sideways blinders on type of situation, which is super, super avoidable. So see what happens. Let's move on. ENDP. And I guess I should probably say, first and foremost, Traders for a Cause, guys. If you are interested in going, reach out. Well, I guess you could just go direct. But Traders for a Cause, the number 4, tradersforacause.org, and click the events. And that is in Vegas. It's the second week of Vegas, so I hope to see a lot of you guys out there. We've got a bunch of sign-ups so far. Usually people that have come end up coming back. It's the 6th one, and I've probably seen the same people 5 or 6 years, plus, a new group each year. So a lot of new faces that I see this year, but a lot of old ones. And the good part about this is what I've said every single time is when you meet the traders that you trade with on a daily basis, especially in IU, you've got thousands of traders that are coming together every single morning, obviously to work towards a common goal of profit or trading well or sharing news, sharing ideas. And you go through a lot together, you share a lot together, and you might never meet these people. It's just an alias online. So it's really neat to actually meet these people in person and further your relationship with them. Just because that's what it's all about. It gets boring with just these monitors. So it's a really good thing, and at the same time, you're doing good because all proceeds go 100% to charity. And so beneficiaries are listed on the website. If you have any questions at all, if you are interested in sponsoring, if you have a chat room and you're interested in bringing a bunch of subscribers, if you have a prop firm, we have a couple prop firms that go and they bring a bunch of traders, reach out. And Zach at ZACH at traders, the number 4, acause.org. Reach out to him directly, and he's the one running the show. And if you have any questions about anything, he'll get back to you right away. All right, let's get into Sunday scan. ENDP, I kind of went over it, but my goal is dips, pull back, consolidate, and then rally back red to green. I think that we could have a really big move here. I think that we could even get into the 450s if we wanted to. We don't have too much resistance on the daily chart until that for very high 4s. So if we do get a chance, an opportunity to get long off dips and it continues to hold, I'm all about that. With that said, I don't want to take it off of radar because as soon as the squeeze, and I do think that this is just probably a squeeze, everybody kind of got short with the MNK news, same thing with TEVA, TEVA. Everybody got a little excited too soon, and then they squeezed everybody out. However, if that is the case, as soon as they squeeze everybody out, we're going to have that sell coming back in. And a lot of times you get that 20-30% pullback right after this move. So the key, just like LCI, is not exhausting yourself on the way up. Because if you exhaust yourself on the way up, you're going to end up in should have left it alone. Now it's pulling back. Now I'm nervous to trade it, etc. So stay focused. Don't try to find the top. Wait for that failed follow through momentum that we talked about on MRNS and on this week's trade on that NTGN. NTGN, higher the better. Likely a little bit of inventory coming out from the filings for anybody that did a little bit of basic research on that. We are right back into this little consolidation area from midday after hours. So the goal would be potentially come back towards the high end of that, 360s, maybe a little higher, and then possibly pull back. It was a relatively easy to borrow name, so whenever that happens, I do hope that we have a couple extra days of staying power. We had that on ABEO. Pretty big name, pretty big float. but it stayed up probably a few more days than it normally would have, just because there's a good chance a lot of people were, on the short side and just needed to churn through those borrows. LCI. I think we learned a lot on Friday. I think that you can kind of see that 1360s, 1370s range, there's a little bit of an inventory person there, a little seller for sure. So higher the better. I think a lot of the mornings they like to just kind of rip it up on low volume and then get everybody on the nerves up, and then they sell to them throughout the day. So be patient and just remember that you don't need to get within 10, 20 cents of the high. Even if it pulls back 50 cents. When this does pull back, it's going to pull back $1.50, $2, something like that. So, just remember that you don't need to get the top in order to get the meat of the move. The goal here is to get the meat of the move. Domo, higher the better here. We had some very choppy action, and I think probably worked in a bunch of shorts, squeezed them out, and churned throughout the day. A lot of these dip buyers, and then they just kind of unwound it on them. So relatively weak close. Anytime that we have a weak close, I kind of look at where it started, and we had this situation on SY a little while ago, where it had a really weak close, whereas the last probably dollar or so happened in the last 5 minutes of the day. So I always try to remember that the next morning, that if it's gapping up 20 cents, well, it's really only like a tiny bounce. Or if it's gapping down, there's a good chance it's going to rally back up on small volume. So I always try to keep that in the back of my mind, thinking all right, well, right before the close, about 20 minutes, it was at 1610, but then it came down to 1570s. That's 40-cent pullback. So if we gap down tomorrow, 30 cents, 40 cents, and it flushes out, there's a good chance that it might snap right back, and that's a trade that I like to take. So I'd be prepared for that. Ideally, obviously, I like shorting. Higher the better for the backside, but just keep in mind, AEO you guys saw. Same thing, gap down, came back a little bit, and then the next day it filled the gap. So it's really a long, short type of battleground. So you just kind of give you an idea. You can see the flush out, comes back, squeezes, fills the gap, and then they squeezed out all the early shorts into the daily chart resistance, and then came back in and closed at the lows. So that's kind of the battle type ground that we're in right now on some of these names. You've seen it on FSLY and Real and all these different IPOs recently that have reported. They come out with the earnings report. It does one thing, and then 2-3 days later, it's complete opposite of what the tape suggested on the day after the earnings report. So keeping an eye on that one. SY. This one, higher the better. There's been a VWAP seller every single day. I mean, there's been somebody pressuring this thing down for the most part. The only day that it was kind of slow was maybe this day where there's possibly a buyer. But same thing, you can see here, this day there was a buyer here, this day here. But now it's just kind of starting to unwind under that VWAP level. So you can see how pressure here, gapped up, sold off, and then gap up ideally tomorrow versus 1060s or so, and then potential unwind into the 9s. So we'll see what happens, but clearly its shorts are kind of smoked on this one. RTRX, I like the chart. This had been down on these earnings this day, but what I'd be looking for is backside unwind. So higher the better in the morning, possibly up towards 1180s or something like that, and then get red. FSLY, keeping an eye on it. I'm still not convinced that it's over. I could be dead wrong, and maybe we come in another $5 tomorrow. But I still think we're in a steady trend higher. I still do think that shorts are pretty smacked, pretty smoked on the way up here. Some good high volume days that had squeezed some out. This day likely trapped again. They squeezed them out through the highs, but overall, they're still holding trend, right? Each level it goes up, it's still holding that. So If it has a weak open, I'd be looking for probably a 30-50, 31 range flush, and then come back up and maybe get up back to the 32, 33 and above. So definitely keeping that one on watch. Tiva, if ENDP and MNK start to rip, if we get into the 2s, 210, 220s MNK, ENDP does 350 to 4. I could see Tiva going 758, something like that. It also got hit pretty hard after hours. You can't see it here, but it got hit after hours the day that MNK news came out. I'll show you that over here, right over here. You can see it got hit, and that was actually that's in the morning. Where is the after hours? Right over here. So I had come in on that after hours session. It had some volume, not huge, but it got hit the next day fairly well. And that's when they all got hit, MNK, ENDP, and I think that's when the trap happened for most of those names. So we'll see what happens, but I'm keeping an eye on all three, just because if they start to fuel each other, we're going to have three names that we can take advantage of. So let's keep an eye on that. Nugget, I was short this on Thursday, got a decent piece of it, but I always forget to put it back on radar. I always, I see a move like this, I'm like, forget it, too hard, and then I look back at the end of the day and it's down another $5. But I'm keeping an eye on this because, look, as soon as the market decides that it's not going to go, straight up again, people are going to start to kind of come for this. And when this does rally, even if it only goes up a little bit, even if it's just a little steady grind, the trade that I want to make is probably on dust, probably fade that or JDST, and it's just going to quickly dissolve just like Nugget did, right? So ETFs, a lot of times they start to build up this premium, and they start to go up on air and lower volume, and as soon as there's a little bit of a change and they start to pull back, they just lose all that built up premium that they had and really unwind rather quickly. So we'll see what happens with that, but definitely keeping those ones on watch. CLDR, this was a really nice trend. This reminds me, not necessarily like LCI, but same idea, right? I don't want to be a hero. I can't be, stepping in front of it and saying this thing has to pull back, but I want to fade this trade at some point. For now, I'd assume that all dips are going to get bought and maybe get a 950, something like that push, but I'll be looking for failed follow through momentum and potential backside trade. So that's what I'll be watching for there. Same thing with home. Pretty clean trade here. And, I was talking to Tex-Mex about this one, and he said, the numbers weren't, awful. And there's a good chance that this thing rallies back. And I was over here hoping low fives. We got low fives, and I just never took it. So you can see here, if you draw a line across, you pretty much a big ABCD type pattern setting up here is over 740. So right now you should assume that 740 is at the top. If we gap over it, might want to come back under it. If we open under 720, 715s, as long as it holds over the 710, I'm interested in it could potentially keep on going. However, if it starts to fail on these 740s, I'll use 750s as my risk and look for that backside, because this very easily could be like what one was that? Just let's see, AEO. Very easily could be just like AEO, and we have that backside type of move after the squeeze out. So for example, it gaps up 750, squeezes everybody out, and then pulls back. So this is how I would treat the home trade, just like AEO. All right, so let's look at MGI. MGI for now, just watching. Reminds me a lot of WKHS. At some point we're going to have a really nice trade. We're going to have a $1, $2 type potential pullback. Maybe not that much. Maybe I'm getting excited about it, but at some point we're going to have that parabolic move, and then it pulls back. So ideally 556, and then slam down. And so nothing that I'm crazy aggressive or excited about yet, but I want to have it up on radar. I want to be familiar with it. I want to see it, and let's see what happens. So MGI, here's the chart. Obviously, we're over the highs, and see what happens from there. All right, so PHUN. PHUN was a nice little ripper this day, and there was like 300,000 bids, 350,000 bids that we saw, and then they get hit, and then they just kind of walked from it, and it looked pretty weak. They washed it out, and almost appeared like they were propping it up, and then they just walked. But what happened after that is it starts to grind up and slowly come back up to the highs. So with that said, it comes back on my radar, and I like the opportunity. So draw a line across 185, probably this high over here is 190s. So I would say probably 190 as your big level. So if I was anticipating this trade, weak opens, I like for red to green push. I don't want to overload into the 190 break because you want to assume that that's going to fail. The only way that I would scale up over maybe a half size or so is if it starts to ramp up over 190s, come back, consolidate, and hold that 190 level, and then break out from there. And then last but not least, these swings have been doing pretty well so far. SMSI, we keep on coming up, and we just hit a new high, 690. The prior one before that was 684, so that was good to see, but it's still rejected. So I don't mind that, given the average that we have. As you guys know, if you've been following this the Sunday scans for a while, I've been swinging it for quite some time and bought on the dips down here based on the quarter, and they pretty much had killed it. So the more that it fails here, that's fine because it reminds me a lot of right over here in this SLDB situation, right on where it had a nice little breakout. If they make it too obvious, if it's too clean of a break, everybody's going to remain long, right? So the goal in this whole market making is, you've got the guys with size, slowly turn them down to a lot less size, and then when the breakout happens, you don't have all these guys with size in your way. And so I think that that's exactly what happened. If you take a look at this SLDB chart, if you guys remember, the day that I took this swing was right over here. I think I have a 610, 614 average or so now because I had added a little bit, but I had sold some this breakout day just because of the, how crazy the move was. But I've been steadily long since then. But this is a nice clean breakout towards this prior resistance spot. Looks perfect, perfect, perfect. Almost too obvious, right? So then snaps, but it came right back up on air, and that's the day that I was interested because I was like, you know what? That was a short trap. It was also the last ditch effort to get everybody out long, and then they got saved, and then away she went. So same thing, SMSI. I am cautiously optimistic, but I'd be looking for that day that it just kind of, maybe fades off. It looks like crap, and if it snaps back that day, I would actually day trade it as well. So that's why I've been keeping it up beyond just a swing trade. I'm going to be monitoring for that day that it kind of comes back off of some failed breakout and then just right up to 750 or 8 or something crazy. Because I do think when and if it does go, it's going to be a pretty big move. But obviously cautious along the way. Been in this for a little while, have a padding, so we'll see what happens with it. So anyway, that is the game plan for tomorrow. If you have any questions, leave comments in the comment section. I always appreciate feedback. I always appreciate you guys that are reaching out and have comments or thank you, whatever, because that's I enjoy doing this stuff, and when you do get the feedback, kind of reminds you why you do it. So thank you guys for tuning in, and we will see you next Sunday.